Actually, what I want to say is that this is a difficult question and it is complex. Why? Firstly, there is the question of Ukrainian air defense. And the second question is that in reality, the Kremlin, due to our strikes, is actually orchestrating a major carve-up of the domestic market. He is destroying, well, I don't want to say that there is anything independent in Russia, but he is destroying private business and in fact is carving it up for those people who are, well, more pro-Kremlin or, well, more loyal to Putin. You can look at this from several angles, you understand? I mean, the situation here is more complex. And in reality, the point is that this only leads to the absolutization of Putin's power. That's my first take. And the second take is that in reality, Russians are more patient than Ukrainians because Ukrainians have felt the spirit of freedom. We understand that, well, we live and have lived in a more democratic society, and we didn't tighten our belts the way Russians have been doing since the 90s. So this specific threshold is actually quite a bit higher for them. And as of right now, they haven't even come close to reaching the same difficult threshold that the Ukrainian people are unfortunately experiencing at this very moment. That is the key, in principle. Also, what needs to be said, the strikes on wildberries, these strikes on the oil industry, this is very important and it is truly necessary, but it needs to be done, well, just food for thought, in such a way that primarily the oligarchs who are connected specifically to the Kremlin suffer. Because how did the Kremlin do it? Due to the actual shortage, they arranged the sale of gasoline in such a way that private owners were shortchanged, while stations connected either to a Russian bank or to oligarchs loyal to Putin received it. And in effect, it turns out that they are buying up gas stations connected to private owners on a massive scale. It turns out that it's the absolutization, the maximization of profit. Plus, gasoline is being bought with Indian rupees. And in fact, that is, well, that's how this regime holds on. So we understand where the approximate margin comes from, where they are roughly profiting from this. It's a similar situation with wildberries because VTB Bank, which is connected to, it's a state bank, how to put it? It's a bank, a large share of which over 70% is in the hands of the Russian state. It is starting to buy up wildberries shares because most likely this director here won't be able to pay these compensations to the victims. And the Kremlin will be doing this, and it will be doing it by increasing its own share in this business. Therefore, this is a very complicated situation. And in reality, because of the sanctions, we just need to, you understand, we need to separate Russia's national interests from the Kremlin's interests, because the Kremlin is profiting from this. It is profiting at the expense of the impoverishment of Russians and the inflation that is currently in Russia. Well, that is an interesting situation, is unfolding, a kind of war machine, and it will grind up Russians, and the Kremlin will only profit from this. The question is complex, multifaceted. Actually, one could give an entire lecture on this topic.
But we are not students, so we will ask you another question. Alexander, I share your approach because in reality, even whatever sociology exists in the Russian Federation suggests that, for example, the large cities in the European part of Russia, especially the two capitals, they are becoming increasingly pro-war as a result of successful Ukrainian strikes. But you can't say the same, for example, about the provincial, about the remote regions of the Russian Federation. Therefore, this is indeed a complex approach. But if you are talking about the need to separate national interests from Kremlin interests, Putin's interests, and the interests of those people in Russia who are against the war, who are even silently against the war, a lot happens silently in Russia. So what should be done then? Not shoot at the residences of Putin and his inner circle. I don't know. Maybe you have something else to suggest.
Rubliovka,
by the way, yes.
Look, I was shocked when I found out the number of dollar billionaires in Russia, 155 people. Well, I don't know. Maybe there are fewer now, of course, and there are $500,000 millionaires. Putin, with the help of this fat, he can roughly cover 1.5 annual budgets of Russia. 1.5 is a lot. Ukraine, with the help of our billionaires and millionaires, wouldn't even be able to cover half. That is, our oligarchs, our business, it cannot support our state the way the Russian one does. There is a lot of fat there, indeed. And here the question should be posed not as who supports Putin, but rather, this is just my personal opinion, how to reach an agreement with those who would potentially be interested in removing him. The question is complex, difficult. Well, it would be advantageous for us, for example, to reach an agreement with the Russian business establishment, which understands that it is being held hostage by Putin. It will be difficult to find this person, I'll tell you honestly, but I think out of 155, we will be able to find someone. And perhaps I will tell you honestly, this is already happening because we are not striking certain enterprises. That is, I don't know, I don't want to mislead the viewer here, but indeed something like that makes sense. We understand that in reality, well, I'll tell you honestly, one shouldn't expect the collapse of Russia. If we are talking about the provinces that understand their dire situation, then this is also a double-edged sword, because it is precisely into these provinces that military production and contracts have arrived. That is, in fact, people from the hinterlands. This is their only, well, they are really receiving big money through contracts with the Russian army. How much were they earning there? 30,000 rubles, right? And here it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Of course, for them, this is a huge amount of money. And actually, I've been actively watching what they write among themselves and what kind of memes and jokes they have on this topic. Well, it's already like a mainstream joke in Russia that wives are pushing their husbands to go to war because there's money there that is astronomical for them. But again, this is poverty. And the question, again, is complex. Where should one aim? That's a good question you asked me. It's very interesting because, well, what should be done in such a case? I believe that one doesn't need to be a messiah here and give you some specific plan, but rather we need to state the approach through which we can find a solution. Well, first of all, we are playing off Western states. We are a European country. We are playing off the United States. So perhaps we should involve foreign think tanks. Partially, this is already happening. But regarding some decisions of our authorities, for example, CSES wrote about the shortage of PAC-3S, about Patriots half a year in advance, and we only reached this point now. Only now have the Ukrainian authorities started making statements. So there is a feeling that we are still falling short here. We need to integrate more with foreign, actually with think tanks, analytical centers. This is sorely lacking because they predict many things long before they happen to us. Again, half a year ago, CSIS wrote about the shortage of Patriot missiles. We could have thought about what to do about this back at the beginning of the war in Iran. Well, this was partially raised in the discourse, but we were falling short here, just as with many other policies. Therefore, it is very important to play off the West and, I would say, integrate the West into making perhaps comprehensive strategic decisions in Ukraine. Because if we are receiving their money, then let them also help us with how to distribute this money and perhaps how it would be better to implement it strategically.
Alexander, do I understand you correctly that if we are counting different billionaires, you think that if Putin tells them to be milked to zero, they will just give everything away, right? Is that how it works? They will all go like sheep to be shorn, right? Is that how it works or what? Well, it seems to me not quite, right?
It will be forced there.
Look, there is a large, colossal budget deficit, right? There is a large debt of enterprises and businesses to the budget of the Russian Federation itself. If we take only various taxes and fees, then in my opinion, as of April 2026, it's about 4 trillion rubles. How much did the oligarchs chip in? 386 at most? That's 10%, I think. They don't really want to cough up money to Putin for the war.
They may not want to, but no one is going to ask them.
Yes, but they aren't giving everything away yet, right, Alexander? Or do you think they'll all go under the knife, every last one of them?
Well, we've seen how someone falls on a knife 3 times right into the heart, or how they shoot themselves twice.
Well, not everyone yet. Not everyone is falling yet.
Well, not everyone yet. That's the point, not everyone yet, because they actually did agree to the terms in reality. And they are agreeing to the terms because their business is in Russia. And if they don't agree to the terms, then they won't have a business in Russia anymore, and they'll be without their money. Accordingly, we clearly saw this in the article by that Russian billionaire, which was published in The Economist, yes, who published that whole story about the good Russians there. I don't support that. About the good Russians, about the fact that it's possible to reach an agreement with them. But We can find the business establishment that simply doesn't want to lose its money. Well, quite simply, he's afraid of losing his enterprises. And these billionaires, millionaires, they want legalization in the West. And this is our trump card, actually, because they want legalization in the West. And Putin didn't give it to them because of the war in Ukraine, because the valve was tightened. And so we can use this to apply pressure. How exactly to apply pressure with this? That is a complicated question. But we saw that when Trump came to power, he tried to play around with this somehow, saying we'll lift sanctions, then we won't lift sanctions. But apparently it didn't work out. If this rhetoric, by the way, has ended, he stopped talking like that anymore. Again, the issue is complex and difficult, but there is still plenty of fat there.
Melnichenko is the surname of this Russian oligarch who was indeed received by The Economist. And The Economist is not a simple publication at all, to put it mildly. But look, it's interesting. Your train of thought is interesting, Alexander, but at the same time, allow me to offer my version. In what sense are Ukraine's strikes effective? Well, beyond the general rhetoric that we all support, the president calls them long-range sanctions, and we all, following him, call them long-range sanctions. But if we talk about who they are targeting, the Ust-Luga oil terminal, that is Timchenko. Gennady Timchenko is a close business associate and ally of Putin personally. Wildberries. Behind this story, after all, are the Russian special services who so skillfully seized this business and, in essence, made it the flagship marketplace in the Russian Federation. There were several of them. Wildberries was the main one. And it seems to me that it is important here to correctly explain what is happening, that including for the Russian population, so that they understand that what is burning, it's not their personal household items in the Wildberries warehouses that are burning, but the business of those FSB officers who are providing protection for it. It's not just a huge column of smoke burning in Ust-Luga, Leningrad region, on the shore of the beautiful Gulf of Finland, but the business of Vladimir Putin's closest friend that is burning. So here it is also a question of communication, actually, not just to rejoice and have fun at the smoking Russian sky, but to explain what is happening. Well, that is at least my job as a journalist. Alexander, what do you think?
Here's what.
Yes.
I just wanted to, well, it seems very strange to me because 2 months before the strike, they had a purchase of parts of an asset there, about 5% of VTB Bank. And this was followed by a conflict between Kadyrov and an official from Dagestan. They have conflicts there. We even remember there was footage at one point when we, well, I haven't reviewed this yet, you most likely have, when there was a shootout between Dagestanis and Chechens. This was related precisely to Wildberries because they couldn't, well, when there was a divorce between the directors, Tatiana, I think her name is, yes, and her husband, they took different sides, accordingly, clans. And 2 months before the Ukrainian strikes, and this is the key point, VTB Bank came in. This whole situation seems very strange to me, honestly. Perhaps, just perhaps, the Russian side partially knew about this beforehand, and they were already preparing a solid foothold to buy up the devalued assets of Wildberries. I really don't know for sure, but looking at the bigger picture, it all just looks very, very suspicious to me. And accordingly, many questions arise.